Hello, my name's Ian Linley. I'm the project manager of the Rural R&D for Profit project, Stimulating Private Sector. The project has a number of partners and I work for Dairy Australia, one of 6 RDCs, Rural Research and Development Corporations, plus 1 university and 2 state governments who are partners in the project.
Agriculture and Water Resources, the Australian Government Department, commenced a program called the Rural R&D for Profit program. Now, that was a new program and they were RD&E projects to support primary industry RD&E and innovation in Australia's primary industries. So this project specifically was to identify practical proposals to stimulate private sector extension services, particularly to fill current gaps. So the project commenced in 2015 and is completing in 2018 at the end of June.
Hi, I'm Ruth Nettle. I lead the Rural Innovation Research Group at the University of Melbourne. Our group were the lead researchers in the Stimulating Private Sector Extension project.
We knew that Australian Agricultural Extension Services were privatising and the degree of privatisation varied by sector, and that this mix of public, private and industry groups were referred to internationally as being a pluralistic agricultural extension system. But we didn't really know how far privatisation had extended, nor its impacts, positive or negative.
The aim of the project was to involve and engage the private sector more in RD&E and particularly the extension role, and to fill current gaps. Now, to do that, obviously we had to understand what the current situation was. Who were the private sector? What were they doing? What were the gaps? And so that's what kicked off all the things that we did in the project.
The project was always intended and developed around a collaborative, adaptive and cross-sectoral approach, with the result an increased understanding of private sector engagement in RD&E as the target, along with developing some recommendations, actions, continued improvement. All these factors, collaborative governance, M&E framework, an actual review of Australian and international RD&E, communications framework. Then we moved into a stage of gathering information as part of the research. So there were regional forums. Very early in the piece, an expert panel was set up and there were some national surveys conducted. There were some online learning modules trialled and developed to do with extension, focusing particularly on private sector extension. 4 trials, action research trials. There were also national forums, so there were 3 of those conducted over the 3 years. And then we had other research and analysis that was going along.
There were 3 main findings from the project. The first was that the Australian extension system is privatised. So it's mainly private providers, with the role of government still there, but generally in a coordinating or in some smaller role of support. So that is that farmers use all the different types of private providers. They draw on 4 sources on average, and that their main source could be anyone. It could be a fee-for-service, it could be a product reseller, it could be a RDC or a processing company. So it just means that there's a diversity of private providers and they're all important to farmers in their farm management and farm management change. So that was the first finding. The second finding was to flip that around. The engagement of the private sector providers tended to be quite ad hoc. So only 14% of the advisors that we surveyed said that they were strongly connected to the RD&E system. That's in knowing what's going on, in input to research priorities, into translating research for their clients, or in delivery of extension. So they're not. There's a lot more that want more involvement and engagement. So 75% said they want to be more involved. So that was the main second finding about that. Now, through the project, we engaged the private sector and the diversity of the private sector in different areas. And what came out of that was that the private sector really did value the cross-sectoral engagement. And so that's our third finding, that in particular contexts, such as in regional areas, in professional development and capacity building, and in thinking about new career entrants, cross-sectoral benefit was there. And so it's something that we need to consider. So they're the three main findings of the project.
The project really did make a significant contribution towards the long-term goals to which it was established to do. And that was to really, start to get some traction and looking at how to improve the R&D system or the innovation system in Australia by bringing together the different parties involved, both public and private, different levels of the value chain and across sectors. The benefit cost analysis tried to have a look at what would that mean in terms of economics. If we really started to improve the way this innovation system was operating and the integration of the private sector, then what does that mean in dollar terms, as well as just more convenience or whatever terms? And with a very detailed benefit cost analysis, working very closely with the trials, looking at impact pathways, looking at indications that this pathway might actually yield the kind of promised results, you're able to see that within a few number of years, we started to see some positive returns on the money spent already in terms of what was being able to be achieved in this particular project. That varied according to the scale of the particular project and who they're interacting with in that way. But cumulatively, the benefit cost sort of came up with benefits in the order of 3.8 to 1 in the traditional benefit cost analysis. And AgTrans considered this to be quite conservative and try to represent as much as possible the kind of benefits that could be derived from this project. They also picked up during their evaluation or their benefit cost a lot of the qualitative benefits that don't actually have a dollar attached to them. When we tried to sum up what we found out through the M&E process, we're able to conclude that the project was successful in triggering the information that was needed to develop some interest and discussion. We're able to find evidence that particular parts of the different sectors are involved, had taken some actions, and we could see little pockets of improvement there. We also saw a general interest in trying to take this whole thing forward, because that's really what has to happen in the changing RD&E sector in the Australian innovation system. So basically our recommendation out of that was there's been good progress made through this project with some nice little elements and change that was starting to occur. We just need to keep that momentum up.
The future impacts for the people in the project are very direct and already happening, and that's taking back to their organisations their experiences about the private sector and what they've been involved in. But there's a broader vision than that, and that is that the impacts also spread past the people who've been involved in the project into the industries that they're in and the organisations they're in. And so that's very much around understanding the private sector a little better. We've learnt how to engage with certain elements and sections of the private sector, and we've certainly learnt that the private sector are an integral part of the system, and we do need to work in, and they're diverse, so therefore it's not the same activity for each experience. The linear model was an example of the past, but we're finding through the project and through the connections we've made in the project overseas and people who've been involved in the project that it's a different system, it's dynamic, it's ever-changing, and it's forming in different ways. So we need to work to understand that. The system doesn't seem to be able to, towards privatisation, doesn't seem that the best way of doing it is to just let it happen. We need to nurture that somehow in the roles of brokers or in the roles of strategic investment to enable that change to happen and to learn from the changes and share those experiences amongst different private sector networks or different industries.